So this is our Zoom class for entry level Wednesday, and it is 1/6/2021. Yay! We did that. So, um, scheduling. I just want to let you know that both Luke and I have been really keeping track of what's going on. I mentioned earlier that the family has a friend who is actually the head of the Genesee County Health Department. She's been a really good resource for us on making decisions about what to do. And so here's the plan. We're going to stay remote for January and start back in class the very 1st of February and get back to the regular schedule. So what I want to let so it'll be 3 days in class, a day of Zoom, and then the same idea of rotating, your study groups and all that kind of stuff. I think this is the most prudent way to do this. I'm pushing syllabus content ahead so that it better fits the Zoom platform, and I've been pretty satisfied with how that's gone. On Mondays and Tuesdays, I'm in charge of my two granddaughters. One is 13 and one is 9, and they are doing remote school. And the 13-year-old's doing okay. But the little 9-year-old is not doing the best with the Zoom learning. And the reason why I bring that up is that I am very aware that some people do okay with this kind of a platform and other people do not. And so as I look to see how staying in charge of the staying ahead with all the homework and all that kind of stuff. I know some of you are staying up to speed and some are not. And I know in my soul, a lot of that has to do just with motivation of being kind of locked down and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not concerned about it. You guys know what's going on with, your own schedule. I'm involved with a writing project where I'm revising a couple of books for somebody, and I have a hard time getting my head to wrap around what I have to do with that. So, in a different way, but I appreciate what's going on. But do try to get yourself a schedule where you're working on those. Your readings and have the book read to you with the electronics. And even if you just do a few questions at a time, um, I know, I get it. But let's, put on our, pull up our britches and do what we can do with things. And so we'll have to the February, we'll be back in class. I think that we will have a good handle on what's going on with this in terms of surge and all of that. And then, we'll play it by ear, as that goes. So try to get some hands-on practice in. And the very beginning of class in February, I'm going to push your midterm exam. Okay. I'm going to give you all of February to get your skill set brought back up. And so I'm going to push the midterm exam back till 1st of March in that area. And the first couple of classes, I'm going to keep you with Luke so that he can revisit and support all of the stuff that you've had up until now without me interjecting my own 2 cents and confusing you. And then I'll be able to bring in my adaptations and the things that I'm really, really good at and all of that, I can start to weave that in to what's going on without yeah, confusing it. You know, you need to get that basic protocol down. There's Abby. You need to get that down before you start changing it up. And so, but I do intend to support, bring forth some theory that will support what those hands-on things will look like lymphatic drain and connective tissue and that sort of thing. So Abby, I just letting you know that I'm gonna keep us remote until February 1, and then we're gonna go back to our regular schedule. So now, one of our class members is experiencing a family member that is undergoing chemo-based cancer care. And I wanted to take just a moment to use that as an example of identifying research and thinking about how you would modify massage and what goes on with that. So the first step you would do would be to go to a Medline Plus, which is where you learn generally about the type of cancer and the various types of treatments. So each treatment protocol has different cautions involved with it. So, for example, if somebody's getting radiation, the area over that, the skin actually gets burned. So you have to be careful about that. Depending on the kind of chemo and the administration schedule, you can get changes in the skin. So, all right. And Abby's not gonna get on here, and Jules has got an emergency. Okay, so got it. Then you're going to go to PubMed, and you will use a search term, massage therapy and cancer. And it doesn't really matter what kind of cancer it is. You do need to know how fragile the person is and all that kind of stuff. But you would interact with somebody that has lung cancer similarly that you would with somebody that had maybe an abdominal or something. The focus is palliative, but that does not mean necessarily that it's a real light massage, but you do have to stop and consider what the treatments are doing to the skin integrity and the connective tissue. The safest approach in order to give comfort care is foot massage, foot and hand massage. And they have done a lot of research on that and how it can bring down that sympathetic arousal that interferes with person's ability to sleep, which then secondarily is going to interfere with their ability to adapt to the treatments. And so that could be, depending on what's going on, that could be extended to like up towards the knee and then arms up towards the elbow. And then there's something extremely comforting about massage with a lot of focused holdings around the head and neck. and gently along the face. These are areas where there's a lot of sensory nerves. And there's also a kind of comforting connection that happens, especially when you're massaging hands and massaging around the head and face. So that you want to think about kind of the periphery, head, face, potentially down into the tension that would increase into the neck, hands up to the elbow, um, and feet up towards the knee. Now, a side effect of chemo, and we'll get into this more as we go on, can be peripheral neuropathy. So, but that doesn't usually happen immediately. And it's a kind of a real nuisance for people once they come off of the chemo to have that nerve pain. And you should be heading into your nervous system chapter in your essential science. And so you can start to, frame where all that's going with that. So of the areas that massage has been researched and uh, shown to be beneficial as a palliative support mechanism, decreasing nausea, that has to do, especially if you're massaging around up in here, vagal nerve regulation, the reduction in anxiety, the sense of connection, the sensory, just the pleasant sensory override, all of those things is very well researched, very well researched. And it's also been carved out as a specialization where people will get additional training. And there is also a specialty certificate available through the NCMBT, National Certification Board, in oncology care. So, it used to be that years ago we thought, oh my goodness, it's going to spread and all that kind of stuff. But I want to give the cancer treatment centers, now that's its own healthcare entity kind of a thing, but they came on board really quick, quite a few years ago, in their platform about bringing massage therapists in. Now it's generalized since then, but just goes to show you how one organization can make a big difference by looking at inclusion. So that's really, nice to see. Sometimes we think, oh, there's too many, it's too big to change, but this one organization, very quietly, they didn't make a big deal about it, but they brought massage in. And from there, those initial pioneers that went in, they have become the kind of the experts in the field over time. And one's name is Tracy Walton, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. So that's a sidebar on all of that. And that pattern is of hands, feet, neck, head, and face. It's a safe pattern there, as long as you're gentle around the neck. Sometimes people are a little too aggressive around the neck when somebody is in a palliative approach. That's a general plan that you can use whenever anybody is fragile, whether they're elderly or whatever. And then the other thing you might want to look for is a technique that came out of Europe called the M technique. M like mom, M technique. It's a very stylized massage approach that was developed so that it could be very easily taught to families and volunteer type caregivers. And it targets the hands and feet in a very methodical way. But that's part of the palliative approach, is being methodical, not being no surprises, you know, kind of thing with it. So there are videos about this. So, and I do pull those up later on in the program when we think about adaptation to certain conditions, but you guys can go ahead and look for it ahead of time. So, okay, I don't know where Luke went. So Jules has got something weird going, and Alyssa will be on when she can. And so I am gonna share screen here in a minute. And we are entering into mod 4. So when you look at your syllabus, that module is all about assessment. And you've already done a lot of it. And you can hopefully relate the theory that we're presenting now with some of the stuff that Allison, are you in bed? I love it. Where can you go to class in bed?
Comfort is key. I have my notes and everything.
You're doing fine. I just thought your hair did a flip, which caught my attention. Then I all right. So the focus today is going to be on assessment using movement and also with posture. And so I'm going to pull the PowerPoint up, hopefully, and I've got some fun activities, and you're gonna need to do some movement yourself, you know, so just to kind of get this reinforced into your little head here. Oh, also, while I was looking for something, who knows, while I was looking for something, I found an excellent review series on YouTube. There's no words with it. It's just got a little bit of a background in music, but it's showing muscles and attachments and movements and all that. And it's Bodywork Vienna, I think is the name of it. Anyway, I put the link on your Canvas for you. Really, really well done.
I'll say when I clicked on the link, it didn't work for me. I tried this morning. I don't know. I'm sorry.
I will put it back up and see if I didn't link it correctly.
I mean, I got it to work. It just led me to the YouTube app. That's what it did for me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it just didn't show me like the actual page though, like the videos that it was linked to.
It took me to their channel, so it worked for me.
It is a channel.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with it because it's different than anything else I had seen. It's not cluttered up with a lot of voiceover. So
the music drove me nuts. Sorry.
Turn the music off. I had to turn the music off too.
Yep. Yep.
I do want to say that if anybody is struggling with assessment techniques, I would be more than willing to help, because in nursing we had to do head-to-toe assessments every day, and we had to learn how to do proper interview questions and stuff like that. And let me tell you what, sometimes some people don't want to give you anything. Like, sometimes you have to figure out how to word stuff so that you're actually going to get what you want, but they don't think you are. So let me tell you what, when we went into the hospital and I'm trying to get information, these guys, some of them were more than willing to talk to me. Others were more like, I don't need you. Skit scat. I'm good. So I am very, very versed in the assessment. So if anyone needs help, I'd be more than willing to help you. Throwing that out there.
Yeah.
With that, so I wrote like a note because I was watching some of the videos. So I know we can do these assessments, but I was looking at them and they seemed very, they're very medical, which I know we're supposed to do assessments and stuff, but that I just raised a question in my head. Is that borderline like a referral? Like we should send them to a
But
nurse?
when we assess for two reasons.
Right,
One is to identify if we need to refer.
right. Okay, okay. So that is, okay.
All right, and the second reason then is to identify contraindications and how we need to adapt
Right.
or how we need to intervene.
Okay.
So the assessments that what I did on the videos was I went and found a nursing assessment because those are the same kinds of things we look for. In fact, I think there were 2 of those. And then there were 2. I had a hard time getting things to link to Canvas. So some of the YouTube videos were linked twice on there, but there were 2 others that were more of an osteopathic assessment, but they focused on joint movements, which is what we were after today. So a lot of occupations, a lot of professions use the same skill set, but their intention might be different. So that's a very good question. And we do need to learn to screen for referral. And this is one of the, so that's part of what's going on with stuff here.
Good practice is like when you're out in the store or anywhere in public, just look at people because you know what's supposed to be right. And this is what I still do it. I can't help it. I just can't turn the brain off now. But like when I go out to the grocery store, I can see someone, I'm like, they've got a limp, probably did this, really should be teetering this way, but they're teetering this way. And it's just like, so I use that as practice too, just generally going out in public and just looking and watching people. It gets pretty interesting sometimes.
Well, and where I want to go here is understanding the levels of assessment and then leading down to an intervention. So we assess, we realize there's no need for referral. Then we work it down to, okay, now, is there a potential for the person to respond to an intervention? And then what would we do? So that's kind of the transition we're making here. The other thing is that Luke is going to do, he's going to be in charge of doing this movement activity with you. So once I set the stage, then I'm going to turn it over to him. So let me get speaker view before I forget to do that. And then let me share screen. I think that's the PowerPoint right there. Share sound, share. Yeah. All right. So I've already everybody see this? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. This is stuff right from your textbook. And I just put it up here as an overview on where we're going with stuff. So what we're after is a plan based on efficient biomechanical movement. Would focus on reestablishing or supporting effective movement patterns based on these principles, blah, 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 blah. So what I want to do is come back to these and see how we did with them. And then also, here are some guidelines that we would use as we are thinking about how are we going to develop a treatment plan. And so as we go through the day, we'll come back to these and see how well we did. So we're going to focus on movement and posture today. And so this is where, oh, look, it's Luke. I'm going to turn this over to Luke, and he is going to lead you through some movement activities that will help with that. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. Luke, say something.
Hello.
There he is.
The benefit of working with your mother.
You're lucky I put a nice picture up. I was looking for one that wasn't.
Gotta go to Sarah for those. There's plenty of embarrassing ones of me, like in that, like in pajamas and like that purple people eater. She got us this giant hoodie thing that is all fleecy and super warm, but you look like a Teletubby running around in it. So
So I
okay,
gotta take a call, Luke. So you're in charge.
okay. You should probably mute yourself.
That probably would be a good idea.
Okay. So where I have learned this kind of protocol I'm going to show you, it's something that I have personally used as kind of a warm-up routine slash something for self-assessment. Where I had seen it or kind of integrated these ideas that came from movement-based concepts like Tai Chi and other martial arts like concepts, as well as like what you've been seeing in your orthopedic assessments. And in the sports setting, my boss back in the day, and they still do this, but for example, he would set up the whole team, including the coaches, and everybody would follow along him doing this general warm-up program, which was really just movement of all of the joints in every plane of movement that they're supposed to be able to do. And the idea is you warm up those joint capsules, you warm up that tissue prior to going into full-on like weight-loaded or faster velocity movement, right? So not rocket science, is just warming stuff up, but ways to do this with people standing. And like anything, in the event that you have somebody that has balance issues, it's not like I expect someone to stand on one foot for 10 seconds for me every time, you know? So you got to think rationally with this. But these are techniques that you can easily use, one for your own self-care, and you can always break these down and assess isolated structures. If we're looking at the foot and the ankle versus the knee, more movements at the foot and the ankle than there are at the knee. So, and it is prudent in the event that something is more complex, and basically always when possible, to assess both when a person's standing in gravity as well as when they're on the table. You take these structures out of gravity, and when they're stacked, you will get a different read. You will get different information based on that. So to reinforce the terminology, the closed kinematic, so where the words will turn into a salad for you is kinetic versus kinematic. Kinetic chain has to do with kind of this interrelated process of like going from one side of the body to the other. Usually you're going to hear associated with like compensation patterns. Find the kinetic chain. Kinematic chain, with the extra syllable there, kinematic, is about whether or not the joints are stacked on top of one another, and the movement of one causes movement at the other. It's like if you're standing with your feet both on the ground, you can't bend your knee without bending the ankle. Those joints are interdependent on one another. So when they're stacked like that and the movement of one causes movement of the other, that's a closed chain, closed kinematic chain, versus an open chain, which your hands usually are. See, I can move my fingers and it does not affect my wrist. So that's an open chain, okay? So things will always be more profound, have a more body-wide effect in the closed chains. So that's why, you know, if you have a sprained ankle, it really messes up your whole posture and all that good stuff. So now I'm gonna step away. Hopefully everybody can hear me so you can see. I'll try to reposition the camera, what have you. The idea is just to break down some of these movements, because it's like anything, you can look at the videos and the pictures, but I try to represent like how you can do these movements using your own body, and you can extrapolate this and use it for assessment like anything. Some of these I'll show like getting up on the big toe for balance. You know, I don't have everybody do that. At the very least, a client should have like their hand on a wall or a chair to support themselves. Walls are better. It's harder to tip and fall over when you have a wall to support yourself versus a chair or even a cane, okay? So I don't have here walls on either side of me, but usually with some of these, that's what I'd have a client do, is have their hand against a wall so that I know they're not going to completely topple over on me, okay? So let me step away. Let me see if I can get this is going to be my challenge, getting a large enough room. So let me first discuss, we're going to look at foot related movements, okay? Now you have extension and flexion of the toes. That's a pretty simplistic one. Extension, toes come up off the ground, and flexion would feel like your toes are pushing down into the ground. Jumping from the toes to the ankle itself, that's where you have the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. Plantar flexion, foot's going down that way. Dorsiflexion, foot up. I tend to pair the idea of plantar flexion with flexion, dorsiflexion with extension. The movement that gets a little funky for people is when they're thinking about pronation, supination at the foot. Pronation and supination do happen at the foot. The best way I can try to simplify that for you is that has more to do with, there's multiple movements that have to happen in order for that to occur, and it has more to do with gait and how the foot changes its orientation at the ankle, the arch, and the toes as you position your foot in front of you while you walk and or behind you while you walk. When I reposition the camera, I'll try to illustrate that further. But usually if you're walking and you heel strike and the foot's going down, when your foot's in front of you, you have to, in order to get the foot in front of you, you have to dorsiflex the foot, you have to extend the toes, and then there's other movements at the midfoot called the subtalar joint. Think like the arch, the foot, because the subtalar joint feeds into the navicular side of it. Whoever had the ankle and had to make the foot before will really appreciate what I mean with that one. But if the foot's in front of you, the foot kind of has to do a supination. As you bear weight and the foot's in front of you, you gotta supinate. As you go past and the foot is behind you now, your foot has to pronate. So there's little movements there. A really important aspect with this is knowing that not just at the ankle itself, where inversion, eversion has to happen, but throughout the rest of the foot, into the arch, and particularly the big toe, that all has an effect on this pronation, supination piece. So, and that's just kind of an awkward one. You can look at some videos on it, but know that the pronation, supination exists, and it's different than eversion, inversion. Those two get confused at the ankle. Eversion, inversion is just frontal plane movements, similar to abduction, adduction, similar to lateral flexions. So, okay. So let me get my camera set here. So representing that, I'm gonna have to, it's odd to see I'm looking at my computer tipped down like this. So, okay. So when I do a basic warm up, or if I'm watching something, I'm barefoot for you guys so you can see this a little bit better. I'm using an old music stand. There we go. So what people tend to lose is their capacity. They tend to lose extension of the toes. This is an important thing to check with even yourselves. Like, can you pick up all of your toes and not feel like you're gonna fall over? And even if it just feels like you're gripping your toes into the floor. These are just important movements to be able to get familiar with. And you as the therapist, if you're observing this, can get a gauge on, is there an asymmetry there? And or what does the client feel? If you do this for yourself, which side feels more difficult? Does it feel harder to lift one side of one foot versus the other, particularly the big toe? I can tell you that my left big toe feels more difficult to raise in that position. So that tells me something. With that, the dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. These are really important. A person should be able to basically feel like they're lifting the entire bottom of their foot off the ground, keeping their heel down, keeping the calcaneus down. They should be able to lift. They can shift their weight from one leg to the other a little bit, but they shouldn't be, you know, sometimes people will trick you. You know, once they're observed, they'll say, yeah, I can do that. And they're bending with their hips. The foot will lift, but they're using their hips to create that motion. So the rest of their body should stay in that nice anatomical position and be able to more or less comfortably get a good 5-ish, 10 degrees off the floor. That allows you to clear the floor as you swing your leg. Otherwise, you tend to drag your foot. When people lose that dorsiflexion, they have to shift to more of a shuffling gait. That's what you'll see. If they can't dorsiflex, then they're not going to be able to go into this full extension of the leg because their foot's going to drag on them. So even if the compensation just happened at the ankle, they end up still kind of shuffling along. And then there you go. It goes all the way up into the knee and the hip just because they lost motion at the ankle. So now, when I was talking about pronation, supination, if you see, what's supposed to happen when we plant our foot in front of us is the inside part of our foot, the arch side of our foot, is not taking the majority of the initial weight impact. So when you first hit, it should be like heel, and then kind of goes on the outside, 5th metatarsal side of the foot. There's larger bones on that side of the foot, so it takes that impact a little bit better. So this motion, as I come in and fully plant my foot, where most of the weight is still on the outside of my foot, that's a big part of the supination side of this. As I shift and I have my foot behind me, then the arch of the foot has to kind of shift over to the big toe. And that ends up being what we call, in relation to gait, that's the important piece of pronation of the foot. When I feel this and practice it for myself, what I do is I say, okay, I should be able to feel like I can shift my weight to the outside of my foot, like my pinky toe is down, and I can still lift my big toes, as well as being able to shift my foot to where it feels like my big toe is supporting most of my weight, and I could move the rest of my toes. That supports that strength and flexibility in the foot. And it's a complex structure, but it causes such a big effect across the rest of the body that if a person's having issues here, being able to break down these movements and give them simple little exercises. If they're bad at lifting their toes, then that's the exercise. If they're bad at being able to lift their foot into dorsiflexion, then that becomes the exercise. I say, you know, when you're just standing in line at the grocery store or something, like, you know, try to reinforce this movement and strengthening so that you can keep that mobility. And to get a little bit more advanced with it, you might find if the foot's overly stiff, I guess is the generalized term, but if they don't have flexibility at the arch of the foot, and the structure is the more important, it's called the subtalar joints, where the talus makes contact with the calcaneus down there. They just need to be able to have that ability essentially to shift their weight from the outside of their foot to the inside of their foot. All those movements, including the inversion, eversion, which happens more up here, right at the talus and at the ankle joint, all those have to work together for us to have a good gait just at the foot and the ankle. So I tend to try to just explain and give you some things to feel and to play with so that you can get a better understanding of why it's so important. And if you limit any of this, it can cause a lot of issues. So going into plantar flexion, if a person has balance issues, or if you're trying to do this, then it's just as easy to go into this position. You can do just one foot at a time. I have to bend at the knee in order to accomplish this, but I can just stagger my stance. Now, what has to happen when we're walking, optimally is that big toe can get into a fair amount of extension in order to be able to effectively walk and not have the same principle I was talking before. That big toe, if it can't go into extension enough, then it's going to drag on me, and I lose my ability to have that clear leg swing. So in massage, I pay a lot of attention to not just how the ankle moves, but the arch of the foot and particularly the big toe. So the dancers in the class, we've had discussions related to this. Remember, Will, we saw the foot in our last class and all that, right? Well, the joint class. An important element in all this balance, for if you're getting fancy with it, I usually tell people to have again, the wall or something to support them. But the ability to get up on our toes and feel supported, where I can kind of walk around in tippy toes. But the nuance here, if we're trying to strengthen this, is can you and or the person we're training, can they shift their weight in this idea of going from feeling like the weight is not entirely on the big toe to shifting to most of the weight being on the big toe. So I'm finding myself, I don't want to lose you guys too much just on the foot stuff, but that's I had to work really hard to build up that dexterity. And I can tell you from the running mechanics, getting to a point where I could strengthen that big toe and hold myself in this position. This left foot had a bad injury back in the day, and that took a long time to get. But once I started to be able to achieve that strengthening, the stresses I felt in the knee and the hip on this side decreased a lot. And it's something that sometimes just doesn't get focused on a lot. People think a lot about just generalized balance here on one foot, and that's happening at the ankle, but there's a really important element of being able to get some strength and stability on that big toe in particular. So again, in practice and massage, it's just a matter of when we're doing our joint movements and working on the foot, think about the movement of those toes as well as the arch. So, all right. In general, now, and with that, you get the plantar flexion. So you can see how if I'm going to run, I have to be able to get really good plantar flexion and toe extension to then clear my foot and everything. So complex movements of the foot, yada, yada, from where we go. Now for knees, oftentimes if I can, I'll just watch somebody sit down and get up out of a chair. That usually gives me a fair amount of information. But one simple way to look at knee flexion in particular and get a sense of where the issue may be is if they keep their knees together like this, and then you ask them to just bend the knee. Usually rather than explaining this verbally to a person, I just have them watch me and try to mimic. It's much easier to just say, hey, you see this? And try. And if they can keep their knees, see how my knees stay together? My hips are not supposed to move in this position. And I just try to flex the knee straight back behind me. Now I tend to have some tightness here around the patella, the lower quads. So there's some restriction. If somebody did this and I see they can only get maybe 10, 15 degrees, that tells me that something's really tight here. Another catch too is when they try to do this, if they end up flexing at the hip immediately, that tells me that something's tight up here at the hip. So it's a simple, like, can the person do this? There's some single leg balance that gets incorporated, but this usually helps me distinguish if they're having a problem related to the knee and the hip. Is the short tissue more at the knee or is it more at the hip? Usually there's a little bit of both, but it really tells me a lot if a person can't keep their hips fixed as well and bend the knee and at least get to 90 degrees, then that tells me that these muscles, the quadriceps muscles, there's something too short there. They're not letting that movement occur. So moving our way up, I'm gonna get myself set. With this, again, this is some of these things I want to reinforce for when we're doing assessment on table. If I have a person laying prone, laying on their stomach, and then I have the knee here. Now, see how I've already recreated that, and then I do that rotation movement. Usually I've shown that to you guys as we work in the hip and glute area. What can confuse people is the idea of the external and internal rotation of the hip, because the foot will go kind of in the opposite direction of what you're thinking with this. So here, as the foot goes that way, that's internal rotation. If you look at what the femur is doing, internal, external. But the standing position lends itself to some isolated movement. I can ask a person to just shift their foot outward and inward, but there's some movements at the ankle where they can trick you. They can say, of course I can, but they'll maybe shift their low back in such a way and say, yeah, I can turn my foot in this way and I can turn my foot out that way. Seated position can help you because you can see if they can actually get some rotation there. But this dynamic of kicking the knees back and forth to check to see how the knee joint is doing. Once a person's in this position, I can also check for this hip rotation by just having them basically, all right, now bend that knee. Say I have hold of the table here for support, but bend this knee, then how far can I rotate that way? How far can I rotate that way? And then, so that's, and then we've, flexions usually aren't too hard. Abductions for you guys to understand and remember. The movements that, and let me bring the camera up a little bit. You're gonna see listed in your books and what have you, many times and or in videos, technically once we're in this anatomic position, everything's already in extension. So if that hip goes further back behind me, that's hyperextension. If I take my lumbar spine and I go further back, that's hyperextension. At the neck, at the shoulders, if they go behind my body in this position, they go more posterior, that's all technically hyperextension. But know that in the literature, it's sometimes labeled as just regular extension. So if you want to be a snob and catch people, then you can say, well, technically that's hyperextension when you bring your leg back like this or at the spine. Now, I believe Sandy has given you guys the kind of catch-all rule. Every structure, every joint should have an optimal range through all of its planes of movement. But to break it down very simply, in flexions and extensions, a person should be able to at least get to about 90 degrees, 90 degrees and a little. So at the elbow, this is a good example of you need at least 90 degrees of flexion to be able to perform most necessary movements for daily life. Now, the elbow is a perfect example that optimally, though, you should have a lot more. You should have in the range of like 125. Same thing at the knee. But in knee replacements, for example, if people can at least get past 90 to 100-ish, that's pretty good. Ultimately, they don't need a ton more. Anytime in there, and I've seen this in therapy, people want to get the person to 120 again, and that would be great. But having at least 90 degrees of flexion of the knee allows a person to get into that seated position and get back out of it. Now, so 90 and a little for your flexions and extensions, 45 degrees for your abduction, adductions, 45 again for your rotations, and 15 degrees for that hyperextension idea. That's kind of your just general, it's you would always want a reference sheet initially for what the optimal range for each individual joint is. But you can break it down if you can at least distinguish what it is. Is it a flexion, an extension, an abduction, adduction? Is it a rotation? Then you can kind of go to, all right, it should be at least 90 degrees for the flexion, and then going back to just regular extension. 45 degrees for both abduction, abduction, and your rotations. So all of this ends up having you always start from this anatomical position. So I say, as you try to figure this out, I regularly had to just stop, stand up, put myself in this position, and put myself through these movements. So but you gotta, even at least visually in your own mind, set the person, as you're thinking about these ideas, in this position, palms forward, already fully standing, knees extended, hips extended, and then all the movements related to their degrees come out of that. So for example, you're always going to see that flexion assessment is related to 0, 0 to 90. And then going back to extension is 90 back to 0. And then you go, so it's just always remember that you're starting here, regardless of how the person's laying on the table. And some charts even will mess with you. They'll have the hands turned inwardly versus outwardly. I think that just tends to be a weird copyright thing. So going back to some of the other movements, something that you need at the hips, and this is a nice, easy, so we were talking about the hip flexion extension. Optimally, a person should be able to bring their leg up and be at 90 degrees at the hip and 90 degrees at the knee. Now, I would like to say that most people can get to full extension of the knee in that position. There's that straight leg test that you'll see related to, that's usually when a person's laying flat. For function, to be able to function in daily life, you usually don't need, you prefer to have that, but I look to see, can a person at least get here at the hip, 90 degrees at the hip, same principle of the 45-ish, and the abduction, and it's watching how much do they compensate with the rest of their body. You know, sometimes having a person, even if they have their hand on one, if they set there's multiple times I'll ask a person to keep their hands on their hips, or at least one hand on their hip, because then I'll see how much their body gets disrupted if they try to trick me. I'll just watch their elbow. So they're doing a rotation at their hip and I see their whole elbow kick out. That gives me an easier read. Or 45 degrees here at the hip and I see that elbow change position. That gives me an extra reference point to work from.
If they have an issue with and you will notice them pulling back their elbow, what does that tell you? Where is that?
That's telling me that there's a limited level of movement, probably at the low back and or hip. That and that tends to be the dynamic when we're talking about these closed chains, is structures near to one another will kind of get bound up, like the muscles and connective tissue, put them in a cast almost, or a brace. So limited movement at the low back and limited movement at the hips. It's a very common thing to see, this whole hip girdle into the pelvis and SI joint into the lumbar spine. All those structures have to work together for you to have a nice smooth transition of, you know, stabilizing and balancing on one leg as I bring this leg up and over, and then balance on that leg as I walk from one to the other. So that's this tough dynamic of being bipedal. You know, all those movements in the foot I was telling you, like, that's pretty complex. Knees are stuck in the middle between these complex joints. The foot and the ankle have all these interesting movements that they can do. The knee is predominantly just a hinge joint. Then we come up and we have the hip, and the hip movement independently, being a ball and socket joint, has a lot of range. But when we balance on one leg and walk or stand, there's a stability component that has to occur at the hip related to the pelvis and the SI joint, which really is just the joint that connects this pelvis and hips to our spine. And all those things have to work independently. I can't, no, it would be awkward to try to show. Oh, I'm trying to think. I think I moved my spine structure. But at the pelvis, what's supposed to happen when we walk is kind of this figure 8 motion. You know, it's not, anytime somebody looks like they're walking like a robot, they're doing it wrong, you know? So the general compensations we tend to see are those where it's much that shuffled gait that I mentioned, or the kind of tendency of like one structure is got fixed and limited. If they have a knee issue, then they're going to have to make up for that here at the hip, and they have to kind of, I'm really exaggerating, but they have to lift their whole leg up here and swing it that way. And that's because they're not flexing that knee enough to clear the ground. Same principle of the foot's too static, or I mean, if anybody's had to walk around in like really big boots, or if you've had a bad ankle injury and you get stuck in one of those boots, I mean, it makes life difficult because you can't move that ankle back and forth, and you're stuck dragging this thing around. We'll give people those scooters, right, to make their lives easier. So,
Luke, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Would you, I mean, this is kind of random, but would you suggest maybe watching like ballet videos to kind of like, because that seems to like match up with a lot of the motions that you're doing. It looks like ballet. Would that be a good idea to like?
All the movement programs, anybody that has to learn how to do these complex movements, particularly like big multiplanar movements,
Right.
Dance, martial arts, a lot of those kinds of systems, you're going to see that there's a big integration of these, where a person is not going to be able to do a very complex motion or movement pattern or activity unless all of these structures work effectively together. So ballet and dancers, for example, if they don't have that dexterity in their big toe, they're not going to accomplish the more complex movements that we're talking about, let alone the point work. And I'm sure Geraldine can speak to that some, right?
Yeah, I would honestly say studying yoga would be more beneficial than studying ballet.
Right.
Because honestly, it's beautiful and it's an art form, but it's not the way that our bodies are meant to move.
That point work in particular is an aggressive movement pattern that usually we don't train into, like actually getting on top of the toes like that. As she's saying, it looks beautiful, but it's not a natural or necessary.
The turnout also,
Oh yeah.
from the hips.
Mhm.
So instead of ballerinas never walk with their toes pointing parallel, they're always turned out, and that happens from the hips. So many times people try to overdo that and then they hurt their knees.
That's a wonderful point to bring up.
But, I mean, yoga for the most part will always tell you to keep all of that in line, in parallel. Correct alignment is really big, and I'm not saying that her watching videos of dance wouldn't be, but there's a lot more than just ballet, I guess, is what I would say with that.
Absolutely. And that's a good point to bring up, that if you look at any of these dynamics, even including some aspects of yoga, if you see a position that is overly exaggerated, then that's usually just unique to that, and it isn't normal or natural. Some of the more extreme postures and positions that any of these systems can put an individual in, certain aspects of, you'll see the complex, sometimes uncomfortable positions in yoga. Those weren't necessarily meant related to movement health. They had to do with a spiritual meditative construct, versus some of the more modern, particularly westernized concepts of yoga are more about the stability and proper mobility. So sometimes distinguishing between these two things, the dance, as she was saying with that external rotation, if I'm trying to mimic what a swan does, that does not mean that that's how a human should move. If I'm human pretending to be a swan, that does not apply to a human trying to be a human, right? So looking, but but breaking these things down and watching. And if you work with a particular population, for example, you work with a dancer, you work with an athlete, watching the person perform those activities and seeing what movement seems to be done too much or to an extreme. Like Geraldine made a good point about the hip rotation. If I see that in ballet, I know, okay, they're really training their hips into external rotation. That gives me information that they're probably strengthening those muscles. And I'm usually at any time trying to correct and balance that out. In basketball, for example, they tend to jump more off of one foot versus another. It's part of the mechanics of when they do a jump shot or they go up for a layup. If they're dominant with their right hand, they're going to jump predominantly off of their left leg, and they're also going to land first on that left leg. So there ends up being a lot of extra strength and stability that's built up in the joints of the left hip and ankle in order for them to maintain that stability of being on one leg, particularly the impact, because anytime you come down on jumping is a very aggressive mechanic with a lot of stress on the joints. So when somebody lands on a single foot, you can imagine there's a lot of aspects that have to effectively act as cushions to take on that body weight. So everything from the foot up into the knee and the hip. And the issue is that the less mobile the joint, the less ability it has to compensate. So injuries related to knees are so common because it has less motion in order to be able to compensate. The ankle, the foot and the ankle, the hip and the low back have more range. So if something gets stuck, a really classic example would be somebody's foot gets stuck in a hole and then they fall. Then, the injury tends to occur more at knees because it has less capacity for more movement. So anyway, going back to the hip, and it was a good one talking about the idea of internal and external rotation. Let me hear myself said again. A nice general movement for yourself and or for clients is you can break the rotation elements of the hip related to gait down to a few things. Now, to start, it's just a matter of can I at least get my foot in front of my other foot? Heel toe, heel toe. Can I return to normal? And they can at least just practice that. You can break these down very small, but I'm just gonna speed it up a little bit. Heel toe, and then into kind of an abduction, widen stance, back, heel toe, heel toe. It's just being able to kind of, and you could do this into quarters. It could be heel toe, same position, but just out. Let's say shoulder width apart. Can I get where I'm standing on a line to where my feet are staggered? One hip is flexed, one is not. And then can I do that behind me and behind me? So heel toe behind, then separated at shoulder width apart, separated at shoulder hip width apart, heel toe, heel toe. That reinforces not only balance here at this leg. As I do that, every time I pick this foot up, I'm having to balance and stabilize at this leg, everything from my foot up to my hip. And then I'm able to reposition my weight, distribute my weight. And a lot is happening as I try to pay attention and feel this. I just ask myself, what's happening at this left foot? What am I feeling there? And the tendency you'll see it with people with balance issues is they kind of teeter-totter back and forth this way, right? And what I will try to watch for, if I'm getting more specific with this, sometimes we don't have the time to do this level of assessment with people, but even for my own self-care, I ask myself, where do I feel this sense of tipping? Is it happening? Am I feeling it at the knee? which would look more like this. They kind of have like this weird, the leg kind of bows back and forth like this. Does it happen more at the ankle, like the whole body, the foot kind of rocks back and forth all over the place? Or does it happen more at the hip, up here where my torso, you can't see my torso right now. But even watching that, related to the single leg balance idea, people will just say, okay, can I stand on one leg? And they're not paying attention to it in the event that they can't. What part of their body seems to be having the most stress? When I stand on one foot, I'm a little bit more stable on my right than on my left. But what part of standing on my left leg is more difficult? Do I feel like I'm moving more at the hip, the knee, or at the ankle? So now the best thing to practice for this is breaking it down. This is where making contact with the floor is important. But if a person can get to a place, even if they're holding on to something, if they can get to a place where they can keep this leg off the ground and they can heel toe optimally, they can at least get where their feet, one foot is past the other. See, I can see all of my foot with this one crossed over like that. Toes forward, so I'm not letting myself turn in and out like this as I do this. I'm trying to keep big toe pointed directly where my eyes are. And then can I swing that from past that foot, around, and past that foot? It's going to be much more difficult if you try this, not usually here, that's usually not too bad, but getting this leg behind you is going to feel more difficult. And most people lose that. They lose their ability to get this foot behind them. And in general, I tend to assume that with gait related patterns, that people get kind of stuck in this flexion shuffling related gait. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they usually can't extend their hip. They lose internal rotation and they lose dorsiflexion and extension at the foot. So being able to just clear, now you'd be surprised, getting good at this is, in my opinion, one of the better balance exercises. Being able to cleanly just do this rotation pattern at the hip. It's incredibly important. If that hip isn't able to do this much rotation and get my foot behind me and in front of me, then every time I walk, there's going to be more stress on my low back, for example. So when if I have homework for people, the two things I usually tell them to figure out if they're really having issues is figure out how to dorsiflex their ankles and to rotate at the hip. This rotation pattern at the hip, not only do I try to reinforce the mobility of this hip that is actually doing the swinging back and forth, but the other hip and leg is being challenged to stabilize with this single leg balance. But I'm getting some minor weight distribution. So this leg is going to have to adapt when this leg is in front of me versus when it's behind me. So, and it's a classic dynamic. If a person can't do this, they shouldn't be trying to go and run a marathon at full blast. If a person can't do this, they shouldn't be trying to go out and do sprints or hurdles or something, you know? So it's traditionally, you have kind of your weekend warrior people that will try to go too fast and too aggressively with trying to get back into shape or something. And breaking down these movements in such a way, one, it's an assessment tool, but I actually have used a lot of this for homework for people, particularly from the ankle, the feet, all the way up to the hips. Some aspects of as I move my camera back and forth, other stuff is pretty easy. Once you get past the hips, it's not so bad. Once you get past the closed chain leg stuff, it's not so bad. You got your spine related movements, you know, rotation of the lumbar spine, lateral flexion, you know, flexion and extension, all that good stuff. Same thing at the neck. With the shoulders, what I wanted to illustrate here is looking at their clothing is a really good assessment tool I've used for shoulders. Every now and again, I can even see what the scapula is doing right through their shirt, or once they're laying on the table too. Just looking at what their shoulder blades are doing is a very easy assessment tool. The thing about the shoulder movements, though, is that we talked about that whole 90 degrees of flexion for flexions, right? So here, 90 degrees, good. And that's related to the ball and socket joint of the shoulder. Now, although we talked about 45 degrees of abduction being sufficient, at the shoulder optimally, it should be at least 90 again. Now, this is a very common one you'll see with people. They usually are okay going into flexion in front of their bodies, but going into abduction will be more difficult. There's the Apley scratch test thing where it's, can I get my hand to touch my back here? Can I get my hand to touch my back here? I am a good example of some relative limitation of mobility at the shoulders, particularly going into this. You'll see that I have to kind of strain. I can't get this elbow directly up. And optimally, that's what I use as a reference here. I can really force it, but this elbow should optimally be able to point almost directly above me. I have a tough time with that. See, I'm kind of off on an angle here. So that's that Apley scratch test. The reason why that's used as an assessment is it incorporates all the movements of the shoulder in one direction and another. If I reach behind me, I've gone into external rotation, abduction, and flexion. If I reach behind me, now I've gone into internal rotation, adduction, and extension in order to get that hyperextension technically, right? So it's testing all these movements, and it's just for a general function. In order to be able to take a coat on and off, I need to be able to have these motions, right? So breaking those down though, what do? I have flexion, extension, I have hyperextension. Now for abduction and adduction, for rotation, I tell you, it's a little bit easier. This isn't necessarily ideal, but it's a little bit easier for your eyes starting out to have a person do this and to show you external rotation and internal rotation. You'll see I actually I have a tough time with the internal rotation. You'll see my shoulders really, and that's not ideal. I'm better here, and then I have a tough time here. And that would tell me something. That would tell me that I have some restriction related to internal shoulder rotation. And then I would go look up those muscles involved, and I would work my way out from there. Now, with these movements, as soon as I start to try to raise my arms above my head, the thing to remember is as soon as I go past 90 degrees in either of these positions, the movement now is no longer occurring at the ball and socket joint, it's happening at the shoulder blade. So if a client comes in and they tell me, okay, they're very easily able to get to 90 degrees of shoulder flexion, but they can't get above that, then in my head, I make a general assumption. I'll do further assessment, but I usually can assume if they can get to 90 degrees more comfortably, I know the ball and socket joint of the shoulder itself is okay. And if they have a hard time getting above 90 degrees, that tells me there's restriction typically at the scapula. The scapula has to do its own series of movements because it's just a weird kind of floating thing. It technically is the only thing attaching your arm to your body, and the scapula, as far as the bones are and ligaments are concerned, is only attached to your torso by your clavicle. So it has this ability to move in lots of motions, but it's hinged right here onto your sternum. The clavicle and the scapula have to move together and they pivot here at the sternum. You can feel that. You start going above 90 degrees in either direction. Obviously out here you'll feel that, but that clavicle and the scapula have to allow for these movements to occur for us to have this good shoulder movement and rotation. So the easy ones there are elevation and depression. That's not too hard to remember. Elevation, depression. You know, usually people are stuck in elevation. I don't usually tell people they need to be more depressed, but in this case, that's where I go to with it. So usually they have a tough time bringing their shoulders back down. And you saw that with some of the muscle entry techniques that I've shown you. When like somebody's laying on sideline, putting a good forearm on their upper traps and having them reach for their toes. It does a couple of good things. One of them being strengthening the muscles that bring the scapula down into depression. Then the other ones that have to happen is upward rotation and downward rotation. When I go into above 90 degrees in abduction, that scapula has to do this with the clavicle. So here's the clavicle, here's the scapula. In order for me to do that, they have to pivot up. Oops, sorry. They have to pivot up like that and then back down like that. So upward rotation, downward rotation. Then we have the weird one with the scapula is the protraction, retraction. And you can feel this some, but it's if my arms are already here, and it should feel like if, as far as weight training is concerned, rows, when people say you got to strengthen your rhomboids, right? The movement shouldn't occur just at the elbows and the shoulder joint like this. People are going to do that correctly. They should really feel like they're reaching, and the space between their shoulder blades and their spine is lengthening in protraction and shortening in retraction. You should be able to really feel that. This looks a little awkward and interesting. But scapula is another good example of it has all this range, and being able to break those down and get a clear understanding of past 90 degrees, if the motion's limited there, scapular problem. And then I start searching and figuring out what I can do to help. So it's kind of just, there's lots of references and pictures for these things, but these are some things to pay attention to, not only for your assessment process, but I really do strongly suggest that you all try to do these movements and use your own body as an assessment tool and see, as you do like dorsiflexion at the ankle, is there some asymmetry? Everybody has a dominant leg, everybody has a dominant arm, and kind of problem solving and figuring out your own unique compensation pattern acts as a good kind of corollary as you try to figure this out with other bodies, right? And this also will help related to your own body mechanics. If you get a clear sense of maybe where some of your hypomobility and your hypermobility is, that lends itself to you knowing what maybe you need to strengthen, which would be your hypermobile structures, and or what you need to get more flexibility and mobility with, which would be your hypomobile structures. You know, you don't want to, being in this profession and learning about the body is a perfect environment to figure out and learn about yourself. But getting a good awareness of that is going to help you be able to do massage more safely and effectively. So, and same principle with the dorsiflexion, everything at the foot. If I don't have good mobility there, I can't get into a stance to do a good gliding stroke. And I might have to, and if it's impossible for me to do that, then I have to realize that and figure out some adaptations, maybe using a seated position more or what have you. But also being able to break these down and figuring out, you know, what can I do to help either sustain or to correct some of this? And if I were to go back to some of the biggest issues that we tend to face, with the neck and shoulders things, well, we've talked some about some postural tricks of standing against a wall and keeping your head back there and then being able to reach for your toes. That's a pretty common one, of being able to just use the wall as a bit of a resistance pattern. You can push against the wall, either in rotation or into that kind of protraction, that retraction. People tend to get stuck more in this protracted flex state. So getting back into extension and usually feeling like you're pushing against the wall behind you in various modes is a good thing to do for the shoulders and the scapula. But the biggest ones I try to reinforce for people is, again, I'll show all that, is the, for you as well as other people, getting good about toe movement, and then particularly at the ankle, this dorsiflexion. If we can't dorsiflex effectively, you're not going to ever be able to walk effectively. One other tidbit I have with that is, if people get into a stretch with this, sometimes people will do this trying to stretch the ankle back here. Once you get there, you can play with some of these toe movements. Sometimes the restriction there at the Achilles and the posterior ankle has a lot to do with the toes. When we get more into the anatomy, we'll look at that more. And all of these movements will translate into showing you some passive stretching techniques. Sandy and I don't show that a ton because people tend to overstretch. Massage is best suited for doing more of the release and creating more mobility by increasing the flexibility of the connective tissue structures and reducing the tone of the muscles. But some stretching, we do need to be able to do, and to be able to do safely, or to recommend safely. But yeah, before I think I've rambled on plenty long enough. Any questions?
Did you ramble? It didn't look like rambling to me. Now that little sequence Luke showed you is actually a functional movement. If you can move in those patterns, you should be able to perform all your daily life activities, which is what we focus on with stuff. So, all right, now I'm going to get my PowerPoint back up. I hope. Share screen. Oh, look, there's Luke. I know. I get to terrorize it. All right, now this is all recorded, so you'll be able to go back and look at this. The nice thing about recording is that you can fast forward through stuff, or you can just look at a segment. So, all right, now this is a form that I don't know if I can open it or not. Let me try. This link is also on Canvas for you. There we go. Can you see that? Somebody tell me if you can see that form.
No.
No.
You have to do a share of the screen of the form.
Oh, I thought I did that. Okay. You are sharing screen. I got to get it up on my browser probably. There it is. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Yep, there we go.
All right. So this, I pulled this off, and you can use it as a general idea of helping with what the normal ranges of motion will be. I tend to try to make this a little bit simpler. So right here, it gives you the back, extension's 25 and flexion is 90. Just to not get overwhelmed by trying to remember all these different ones, and I think Luke mentioned that your flexions are 90, Your extensions are about 15, your internal rotations, your external rotations. It makes for a simpler visual assessment of stuff, but I thought that this was really helpful. And you can download this. Like I say, the link is up on your Canvas. So let me get out of this. Luke, you're still there. Now, here's where I want to get. Can you guys see this now? All right.
Yes.
So when we are doing assessments and we're doing visual stuff and then we're looking at movement stuff, again, to try to make all this practical, what you're going to look for in a postural assessment is caves and hills. Now, this is a real simplification, but it works really good. So a cave is where stuff is short. And a hill is where stuff is long. And if there is, these are showing it what it looks like on the frontal plane. But if there's something short here, like the shoulder is up and maybe the head is down, there will be a corresponding hill. It's not always here. It could be in the segment below. You could have a cave here and you could have the hill can come over here, but it's about keeping your eyes focused on the horizontal plane and being able to do that and how you will adjust your body. This, like I say, is on the frontal plane, but you also can get this on the sagittal and a little bit on the transverse plane. When we do massage, we provide the interventions primarily in the caves. And we're going, but the symptoms usually show up around the hills. So I'm giving you some general principles about what's going on with stuff. So if we're going to do a massage, intervention in the cave and comfort care on the hill with possibly a trying to get it to activate. So I might massage in this cave right here by the shoulder and try to get that to lengthen. But then over here at the hill, I might say to them, okay, let's see if you can get your shoulder to your ear, which is going to bring in some of that therapeutic exercise with that. So keep this little tippy pole guy in mind here. And then I'm going to put some videos. These are just some pictures, not videos. These are just some pictures. Some of these should look familiar. And we can, in our heads, start to go, oh, okay, all right. So this is a flexion, and that's a flexion, and there's a flexion, but that's above 90. So that means that the shoulder, the scapula's got to move. And then here's some gait. Now this person sitting here, can you see where we've got a cave right here on the low back? And we've got another cave here in the front of the neck where that posture is strained. Just try to put yourself like that. And then you can go, well, if I'm going to do massage, I'm going to make sure to try to get some length in here in the lumbar area and some length here in the neck flexors.
And that shows a pretty common pattern if you even look at the caves and the hills of the hips and the knees. So in practical application, why a lot of the focus was finding an effective way to work at those hip flexors, because people may have a lot of symptoms related to the anterior knee, but the caves related to posture, the positions that people find themselves in, I usually just assume they're in a rougher seated position like this. And this is kind of a pretty common idea where you have a cave related to the low back, a cave related to the hips inflection, and a cave related to the knees inflection. And those all pair together where, and then you take this person, they try to stand up and they're going to feel restricted. So where do I focus, as she was saying, for massage? I have to find a way to effectively work in some of these areas. And a big key one tends to be that hip flexor area, because it does not get addressed enough because it can be awkward. I've shown you guys, if worst case scenario, you go over the sheet, but if you don't work at that cave, look at that. That's one of the biggest caves we have in the body when somebody sits for a long time.
And this gets long. And
Mhm.
you have, I mean, you've got lazy butt syndrome that happens right in here. So we end up with a lot of people that have low back because they're not getting the proper stabilization because their glutes aren't working. So 9 times out of 10, if you bring just the littlest bit of length into these caves, these ones that are long, they'll kick in on their own. Or just a little bit of, like this would be a couple little hip extensions. Now, if they're going to move on towards therapeutic exercise, then a lot of what we would take a look at is where are all the hills. And let's see if we can get those to activate. And as you activate those, you're automatically stretching the caves. So if we look at for some asymmetry in this picture, making an assumption that left and right side should function fairly evenly. Who wants to chime in on starting to notice some differences in the range here when we compare one side to the other?
Well, the right arm is going up higher than the left arm, or
Okay.
the shoulder. It also looks like the right shoulder is lower than the left shoulder, and same at the waist. There might be a little bit of difference in the hip as well.
Yeah, right here we've got some shortening a
Yep.
little bit. There's a little cave right there. Something is restricted here, and like what Luke said, that's scapular movement because they're about 90 degrees here. The
Right.
other thing that will fit in and reduce this movement is something that comes from the low back up into the arm. And the big muscle that does that is the latissimus dorsi. So if somebody can't get their arm above 90, that would be the one place that you also might want to look that is not directly attached to the scapula. So this is what I want you to start to be able to take a look at and get this idea. Okay. All right. Where's the cave? Where, what's restricting it? Why? And when you try to do an intervention, you're not looking for a complete change. You're looking for up to a 50% improvement, not 100% improvement. So, and the other thing to remember is that it's not so much how they feel right after the massage or how they can move right after the massage. It's how they can move 2 days later. This is progression here. And so if somebody really has some postural issues, and there's a lot of controversy right now on how important posture actually is. And there are plenty of people that have horrible posture and they do just fine. They don't have any symptoms. So if there's no symptoms involved with this, then, don't fix what's not broke. All right. Just kind of go, okay, but the premise that I work off of is the more asymmetry we have, and we're going to have asymmetry, but the more asymmetry we have, the more strain on movement there will be. And if massage in general is trying to reduce strain, then if we can improve some of this just a little bit. So for me, the first place I would look right here is here's that cave and the big muscle that's here. is the latissimus on their side. And I would think about inhibitory pressure with some movement. That would be the intervention I would use with that. Now here's a bunch of characters.
Before you move on, Sandy, you mentioned there's controversy on posture, and if the posture is poor but there's no symptoms, not to worry about it. But isn't there a long-term effect of poor posture?
This is what they are really questioning. Is this, you know, what is optimal posture and does it matter? And I'm not one that's going to jump on a bandwagon either side. I'm not the kind of person that's going to say, oh no, posture is everything. You've got to have symmetry on both sides and all that. Nor am I going to go the other direction and say, oh no, there's no value in, just ignore it. Doesn't matter how crooked they are. You know, there's a balance between that. So so your question is, well, what if they stay in that same posture over time? And you will get some soft tissue and potentially even joint related changes that are adaptive. And so how far can that adaptive process go, and how long can it go before somebody begins to be symptomatic? So I've got a little older lady I'm working with her. She's got some neck pain, and it's really isolated in the upper shoulder, and she's been through a battery of tests, and they found some arthrosis in her cervical spine. There again are questions. Does that mean that there's really a problem there that is symptomatic? Because they can do an MRI or whatever on anybody's back and find bunches of problems, and some people are just in agony and others don't have any symptomology at all. But I work off of the premise that we are designed to be fairly symmetrical. And that if we have something that is problematic, so she's got some changes in her cervical area, and she gets a little bit of a nervy pinch on it. So she's made little gentle adjustments with how her head and her shoulders are aligned in order to take the pressure off of that nerve impingement in through there. Well, it's reached a point where these little tiny adjustments have now become a problem in and of themselves. So what I've been trying to do with her is go, okay, this neck is going to require compensation, but maybe not as much as her body is doing with it right now. Too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. So I've been messing with it a little bit at a time. I mean, she's in her 80s. And so I saw her yesterday, and now this thing that's been bugging her in her shoulder has diminished, but she's starting to actually feel the sensation up in the cervical area where the problem probably is generated from. So now we had to have the discussion, okay, so now we got to find that happy balance where the changes that have happened in your neck, you're getting just enough movement so that you're not pinching the nerves in there, but it's not also straining the shoulder. Do you see, Londa, the balance that goes with that? And I knew we had reached the point because now she's getting a different set of symptoms. So it's a real critical thinking line that you go through on how well are these postural changes working for somebody? How extreme are they? Have they gone beyond compensating resourcefully for some other thing that's going on and are now becoming problems in and of themselves? There's no black and white on that. It's really trial and error on where that goes.
And that's kind of the tough part with all of this is that ultimately you're going to hear, you know, we tend to assume the problem is more of a problem for the client and for us as a practitioner when there's more of an exaggerated symptom in relation to it. The more difficult a movement, the more pain and discomfort that is created, then the more we have to look at causal factors that we are assuming are wrong. You know, we can, and there's a tendency from many spectrums to look at even individual joint structures as being the focus. And one can be a flat-footed person versus a person with a high arch. I have seen people with flat feet be incredibly good athletes with no real negative symptoms whatsoever. And I've seen people that are comparatively very symmetrical, but have maybe a lowered adaptive capacity. So the challenge that we always have with this is any system will try to over explain and even oversimplify. Kind of it's two ways of it. It's odd to say that, but the over explanation of assuming that one specific pattern, one specific posture, one ideal range of motion of every single joint is optimal for every single person. Each person in each body is unique in its own right. What we need to look at is usually capacity to perform the functions that the person wishes to for daily life without it being a struggle or having too many symptoms. But I have seen people look at making an assumption, for example, that the arch of the foot is non-optimal for performance. They go, okay, you're flat-footed, you should be in a hard orthotic, and we're gonna really challenge this and correct this. And that ended up creating more of a problem than letting the person naturally adapt in response to their own odd anatomy. Sometimes we can try to overcorrect things rather than what Sandy's saying, finding kind of this happy medium. Nobody is born perfectly symmetrical, and or injuries and certain things happen. So we kind of always have to be aware that there's a middle ground with this. We can overcorrect as well as and oversimplify very easily.
And Geraldine spoke to this in terms of ballet. So you also have postural shifts and changes related to performance. And I have moved, you know, with massage and stuff, moved somebody towards more symmetry and really screwed up their performance. You know, so that's another thing to consider. And so with a ballet dancer who has that external rotation, what I try to do is make sure that the flexibility and the stability that's needed to perform and the changes that their body has gone through in order to support that performance are not also in the future going to cause problems. And I've not always been successful with that. Some of the athletes that I've worked with, that their performance demand, there's an exception that there's an ability to accept, you know, this is eventually going to cause problems with my knees or my hips or whatever. And I accept that risk. I accept that as what could happen in the future in order for me to be able to do what I want to do right now. That's always been a little bit of an ethical dilemma for me, is to go, okay, I've worked with athletes that throw, and the shoulders are just way too hypermobile. But in order for them to perform, that's what it's going to take. And so you try again to keep things as contained as possible. And then you have people that have had a trauma, they've been in a car accident or something, and that maybe there's been a surgical intervention, or Luke's dad was in a car accident and had multiple fractures along his spine. And they put some rods in there. Well, that changed all of his movement, and it made him come quite forward and roll at the anterior thorax, because he didn't have any of the other spinal curves that he had. But the anticipation of there being a permanent move towards correction on that was not feasible, because he had altered anatomy in there with those rods in his back. But that doesn't mean that he isn't going to experience some symptoms here in the front where he compensated for that. And massage can, through a variety of mechanisms, maybe not reverse that posture, but can help this not be as distracting and have as much discomfort. And that's also a real value in what we provide. So who wants to take a gander at this first character that's standing up and point out a cave? Somebody pipe up and see if we can find a cave on this character.
A cave at the left shoulder.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
this one's further away, right?
right.
Okay.
Yep.
You see this one right here?
Yeah. And then there's that one there.
Anybody else got one?
There's one at like the left leg, if it's facing me, on its left side. Its left
Okay.
side to our right.
Can
It
you
like goes in at an angle.
Yeah, and can you see that this is rotated externally here? This foot comes forward, but this one turns out just a little bit. Now this character is easy to see, the caves and the hills, right? And same with this one.
Mhm.
So start to think, okay, I'm going to do a general massage all over, but I've done my postural assessment and I followed up with some range of or some joint movement assessment. And so today, I'm just going to try to create just the teeniest little bit of length in here and in here. Okay. There's, somebody just leaning against the wall. But if they do that a lot, do you see where, to Londa's point, if somebody does this a lot, do you see where you have a tendency to cave in right in here?
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, first you'll have motor, more of a nerve muscle tone shift. But then you'll get some connective tissue type changes in through here. And, I'm trying to think, but maybe like somebody who's speaking up in front of the room, or a teacher or something like that, that's lecturing a lot, I can see where they could get into this kind of a position a lot, to the point where your body thinks, okay, we're in this a lot, we should change the structure just a little bit so it's easier. But then when they try to stand up out of this, they run into some issues.
Like the roofer I was talking about a few weeks ago that stood on flat ground, he was leaning forward because he was always up on the roof.
Yeah, and so which one do you support?
Yeah.
gonna help this person be better on the roof? Or are you gonna help them be better when they're on the ground? Or you're gonna try to find a happy medium somewhere in between the two? You know, these are the decisions. Remember that critical thinking thing I had at the very beginning? These are the decisions we encounter all the time. People who sit cross-legged a lot, this is common. And you will get changes related to this. Anybody see the external rotation in this one? See how that foot wants to externally rotate? Now, we notice the asymmetry, but we can't make a decision on whether it's right or wrong. We just notice the asymmetry. Maybe this that immediately I looked at and saw, okay, so that's an external rotation. But maybe this is the one that is problematic. That's why I don't try to make, I learned, I don't try to make really big decisions really, big changes really fast. Okay, this looks a lot like that one mannequin. We lost Jules, there she is. Okay, where this arm went up further than this one. You can get a, remember Luke talked about clothes and how you can look at clothes and you can see the lines in through that. I can see that there's a rotation going on here because of the way those wrinkles are going in the clothes. This person is inverting. So this one's got a backpack that they have to counterforce with. And if you know, there are people that wear up something on their back a lot. Can you see how form and function would cause this front part to shorten here a little bit? Computer, where's the cave? Here.
Yeah,
I do this a lot.
on his left side, right?
Yep.
Because he's tilting his head to look at something.
Yep. I do it
Yeah.
because of my vision. I've
Uh-huh.
got, I have adapted to how I hold my head so I get in a clear visual aspect with my eyes.
Yeah, so a lot of people with like multifocals or bifocals are gonna have something like that.
Yeah. How about this one? This one's related to a musical instrument. How many hours of practice?
Okay.
And then when the person tries to do something else, then they have optimized their postural function to support this activity.
Mm-hmm.
And then they notice symptoms when they're doing something else. So here, pregnancy, you've got more weight here in the front. So you counterbalance that by leaning back, but then you get an increased lumbar curve, which is gonna make your butt stick out. You see all the different things that can happen? Now, movement, this works great when you're pregnant. But when you get into a non-pregnant state and you're trying to reverse this back and you're carrying a, you know, they detach from the inside and attach to the outside, you're carrying one of these little critters around, that changes your center of gravity again. Carrying around these devices that you plop these critters in, you know, like the car seats and that sort of thing. Oh my goodness. The number of people I've worked with that have become symptomatic because they're carrying around a kid is amazing. So we're going to do a breakout room. And I posted these pictures also on Canvas. I'm going to put you in four rooms. And I'm going to give you a picture. And this is the game you're going to play. It's a first time client. You're going to do a little bit of you're going to do some generalized postural assessment. You're going to have to make some assumptions about what their movements are like. Then I want you to develop a history. Make up a story. Oh, this person, this is what their occupation is, or this is the hobby they have. And then if you extrapolate on that, what other physical assessment stuff might you find? Like let's look at this one right here. All right, so first time client right here. And so the story I'm going to make up on this person is that they are.
She plays the cello.
Okay, she plays the cello naked. Nakedly, she plays the cello.
I didn't say that. Sandy, I don't see the links on or this PowerPoint on Canvas.
Okay, I know I put it on there. Let's see if we can find it. I'll open my Canvas up.
Okay, because I know you said you had troubles putting the link up there for the Zoom, and that's usually where it's at. But just the two links for the Zoom are there.
Go down to the next one. Go down to the PowerPoint or the Canvas announcement that says preparation.
Okay, let me look again. I thought I went through them all, but you know.
All right. So this person plays the cello naked, and they spend a lot of time looking over their shoulder because they want to make sure somebody's not going to walk into the room. Right? You see how I'm just making up a story on them?
Yep.
So I would expect that they're also short here. These tissues are short. And I would also expect that they've got, on the opposite side, they've got some shortening in their waist. All right, so that's what I want you to do. Okay, so this is group one. Did you find it? These pictures?
I haven't found the pictures yet, but I found pretty much. Let me.
They're down at the bottom.
I'm opening up some of the links. Is it in a link or?
No, it's all the way down on the bottom, and it's a Word document.
Okay, so it is a link.
It says
The
assessment.
muscular. Nope, that's not it.
So here's group one. There's group two.
Okay, it's a link. It's in the paperclip.
There's three. There's four. All right. Let me look at, I'm going to open up my Canvas here.
I found it in the PowerPoint. It's a paperclip for the mobile users.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It's just below the PowerPoint, right?
I found it in the PowerPoint itself,
Okay, that's another place where you could find it.
but I didn't find the Word document. So.
All right. So stop share. Oh, I gotta go. I gotta do breakout room. Okay, so we're gonna do 4 groups. And I'm gonna give you 30 minutes to mess with this, and you can get a break in there. Okay?
How long?
30.
Okay.
Hello, mother. You're muted.
I said that went very well this morning.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be able to have the camera show my full body, so
Well, we enjoyed looking at half of you at a time.
I'll try to get a better version of that. My sequence got thrown off, so
That's okay.
Hmm.
All right. 20, 19, 18, 17. There's the countdown. Ta-da! We're back. I'm going to change the view here. Ta-da! Okay. As a reminder, let me share the screen here. All right. So here's group 1, 2, 3, 4. Good job who posted those pictures to text. What would we do? We're so tech savvy, I can't stand it. All right, where's group 1?
Right here.
Okay, you're going to be the spokesperson for this?
I am.
All right, what do we know? So tell us the story about this character.
All right, so Elliot, no more for a minute, please. So this is Run LMT. He is a rapper from the 90s with a one-hit wonder called Crack Your Back. He did a lot of popping and locking, and he has come to us with extensive neck immobility and tightness. His upper body is super tight and sore. So we are going to help him with that.
Did you discuss how you're going to help him?
Yes, we're going to give him a general full body massage because he's beaten himself up so much, but we're going to focus on the caves of the neck. It's lengthening the extensors in the neck, but also working on the trapezius muscles into the pec minor to try and help with loosening him up because he's so tight and rounded forward. And we said that that's causing him issues because he feels it in his back. So we're going to also work primarily on the upper back as well, on the hills of that to lengthen those muscles, but to give him a little more relief from all of his days of hip hop dance and whatnot.
So on the hills, you don't want to lengthen them any further. They're already kind of
we want to lengthen the short. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Now we talk muscles because that's what we have focused on so far. But a lot of this, especially since he was a rapper in the 90s.
Yes.
So a lot of this is kind of, let's say, solidified in there. So we haven't gotten specifically to the idea of the connective tissue structure, but muscles are embedded in jello, and for a visual idea. And so we also want to affect that jello part too. So just expansion on what we're talking about. Is there anything else with this guy?
Yes, we also said that we were presuming that he has hip issues from all of his dance and probably needs some work on his feet. But I have to give Alyssa credit. She came up with the rap name. It was Run LMT. So the LMT. Because we were gonna go knick-knack paddywhack, but that was so we're gonna, like we said, we're gonna do the full general body massage, but we figured that on the first general massage, because it's his first time, we're gonna focus on those areas that he specifically said were tight and sore, but we're probably gonna find further issues in the hips and leg muscles along the line because of his history with dance and so on and so forth. It is just funny, like where we went with this, because I looked at him and we all said homeless, but then we wanted to not like be like, no, he's not homeless. Let's give him a better story. So we decided to make him a rapper because of the baggy clothes and everything. And then we said, let's make him a 90s rapper.
God, that's what I look like most of the time. Luke doesn't look any better when we're running around the house either. So you bring forth a few ideas on this, and one that I want to commend you on is the idea of implicit bias, where we look at somebody and we make assumptions, and we always want to gauge ourselves on that we want to really hear a person's story. We want to be curious about that. We want to be engaging with that. We want to take the time with the conversation around the history. Like Michaela said earlier, sometimes you have to encourage them to speak to you. But if we create an environment, then we can move so that we can encourage those discussions. Then we can move past our perceptions. We all do it. Every one of us does it. So we just have to be aware that we do it and catch ourselves on it. Anything else came up with your discussion on our rapper here, our old rapper?
We were just pointing out also, oh, boys, shh. We were noticing also that one of his feet turn in, his neck does tend to lean to one side. He does have that rounded forward. And we were also just noticing how he was sitting and how that could be because that's the only way that's comfortable for him to sit. So we were just talking about all the different things that, like, is he sitting like that because that's just the bench is uncomfortable, or is he sitting like that because of a issue that he's having?
Very good. Very good. You can observe a lot, and lots of times you get a lot better information from just watching how the person moves in your environment, rather than going through these very specific stylized assessments. And this particular sitting posture is indicative of hip flexor shortening, where the arms come forward and they lean up forward on their knees. So that was really good. The movement of the feet apart to create a bigger tripod. So that was really good. So what was your biggest laugh while you were doing this?
Trying to make him anything but homeless.
Okay, so we have the implicit bias.
Well, so honestly, we started with saying, okay, he's former military, because I saw the buttons down his jacket and stuff, and we thought maybe he's an old military guy. And then we popped in with, well, he kind of looks like he's homeless. And then we said, okay, well, how can we spin that so that it's something that, so we were just having a laugh, being creative and like trying to think of his backstory, because immediately we were like, well, here's all the postural stuff. So then we were like, okay, let's get past the postural stuff because we've got that, but let's make his story now.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. All right. Where's group 2?
I'm the spokesperson for group 2.
All right. So what's the story on this character?
This is Millie. She's a female in her 70s, retired mother of 12. She birthed 12 children. Most of them were sports activists or were athletes. So she spent a lot of time sitting on uncomfortable benches, watching her children play for hours in games. So after the multiple pregnancies and many hours of sitting, she carries a lot of baggage. She is extremely right-hand dominant, and the right side dominance has taken its toll on her.
We noticed that her head is tilted forward and to the right, which is causing a shortness of the muscles in her neck shoulder area. Both shoulders are rolled forward, and this is partially to compensate because she has such a heavy bosom, which
Wait a
causes some shortened pectoralis muscles. And that's not only that, she has them rolled forward, and her right shoulder is dropped and depressed a little bit more than the left side. Because she is so right hand dominant, there's a shortening of the muscles on the whole right side of her back. Her left hip appears to be lifted, so most of the weight when she's seated is on the right hip.
Good.
She's battled weight gain most of her life, especially after all 12 pregnancies. So this leads to a curvature of her spine, causing her hips to tilt forward and therefore a shortness of her hip flexors also.
Very nice.
Because she habitually sits cross-legged at the ankles, this is, we believe, to compensate for the hips being unaligned. And so part of her treatment plan is to encourage her to cross her ankles the other way, along with body work on her full body, because she needs lots of attention. Special attention to her right neck and shoulder, both her pectorals that are extremely tight. Working on the range of motion in her shoulders, working her SI joint for her hips and lower back pain, and also her hip flexors and the right thoracic area. Encouraging her to sit equally, encourage her to roll her shoulders up and press those scapula down her back, and start using her left arm more to carry her bag. We said we were going to recommend that she starts carrying a smaller purse or bag, or start convincing some of her children or grandchildren to do the carrying for her so that she has a lighter load.
That was very good, group 2. What do you think she came in for the massage complaining about? What did she tell you?
Lower back pain, limited mobility in her arms or shoulders.
And who came up with the idea of 12 pregnancies?
I think that was me. Both of us.
I don't know.
Oh, I said lots. She said 12.
She said lots, so I was like, well, I'll go with 12.
You know, it was not uncommon for somebody her age. Did you say she was in her 70s or 80s or
70s? Yeah.
To have had more pregnancies than the current generation may have.
So somebody said something about a very good Catholic.
There you go. All right. There was some cultural influence. But multiple pregnancies, a history of multiple pregnancies can take its toll. You know, you think about what happens to that pelvis, and each time it spreads to have a baby, how much future instability there might have in through there. So that was a nice nuance on the history. What's her mood like? Is she generally happy person? Is she just?
I think so.
Generally happy? Everybody in group 2 agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got a pretty good look on her face, don't you think?
Yeah.
What was your biggest chuckle other than the 12 pregnancies when you were sorting this out?
I said she, because she was attending so many sports events, that she doesn't enjoy sports. She's there to support her children.
Yeah.
And she was always knitting or crocheting at the games to entertain herself.
It's interesting you bring up the discomfort of sitting like on benches and stuff. And
Mhm.
it is really hard on you to do that. So it especially when she's sitting here, to me, and I have this, that's why I'm aware of it, it looks like her legs aren't quite reaching the floor. And so there's this, she's got short legs and she's got to have her, in order to balance herself, she's got to have her toes down.
I have that problem too. It really bothers my knees.
And it gets you in the just above the lumbar area,
Yep.
close, to the 12th rib in through there when you have short legs like that. And so another recommendation that I might have come up with on that is make sure you bring a book or a stool or something that you can put your feet on.
I often stand instead
Yeah.
of sitting.
Yep. So, okay. Now, where's group 3?
Well, I'm in group 3. Hello.
All
Hi.
right. Teresa, are you Londa's the spokesperson for this one?
No, I was
it's
in
Celine.
2.
All right. Who is?
Celine.
Oh, Celine. All right.
Hi.
Where is your little self, Celine? I'm looking for you. I'll
I
find you.
should be there. I promise. I am.
All right. Let's do it.
Right. Let's do it. So we've decided her name is Lizzie Woods. She's about 20 years old. She's a pre-law student studying environmental law. She enjoys being outside and laying down when she studies. She comes to us for a massage after a test that she's been studying for, talking about general back and neck pain and stiffness. And we identified the caves as probably the front of the neck and then like the back, because she's kind of sitting up with her arms and her like hand against her head. So she's kind of extending and looking down when she reads while like simultaneously putting herself up with her back. Then we said her knees were probably externally rotated because she's got her legs crossed and she's doing that a lot. And then possible ankle stress. We said that because there are multiple movements that she's making with her ankle, they're kind of like crossed and it looks like she's almost like kind of pointing them up a little bit, but they're like not relaxed, I guess.
Okay. Well, yeah, she's very stiff.
Exactly.
These are all statues.
Yes, exactly. Hard as a rock right over there. And then we said the left side of her neck is probably a hill and we'd have to work on strengthening because she's always resting her hand against her face. Yeah, that was our general thing.
So, a little nuance here. And we're going to talk about this a little bit when we look at an intervention process with the muscle energy. She's got her upper body in extension. Can you visualize that? But she's looking down. And our eyes, the muscles in our eyes and all the proprioceptors in our eyes, the listening stations are very involved with anticipating movement. And so when we look down, our eyes go down, we are telling our body, prepare to move forward or to bend forward. Okay. And if we look to the left, it's the same way. Prepare to move left, prepare to move right. So she's got herself, and you guys can do this while you're sitting right there. So arch your back and bring your head back. So your eyes want to go up over your head. Now look down. Can you feel some strain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this posture, this position is asking the nervous system to do something it's not designed to do. So there is a setup right here for her to have a disconnect between her flexors and her extensors.
Okay.
And how they're going to respond to a particular movement. And yet, this is a common posture for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But what this is saying in the neck and in the lumbar area and the back, it's saying do this, but then her eyes are telling her to go the other way. And if you do that again and then look down, you're going to see that there's a lot of tension right at the base of the skull, and that there's a headache.
Or even like migraines.
Could be because the sternocleidomastoid, this thing here in the front, is moved forward so she can get her hand on, her chin on her head here. And there's trigger points in that can mimic a migraine in through there.
Wow.
You guys are doing terrific on this. Did you have a laugh while you were pulling this one together? Other than the law student?
I'll say that was kind of about it.
I want you to know I spent hours looking for just the right pictures for you guys.
They're really cool statues.
I just wanted you to know how much,
We appreciate it.
how much effort I put into this. Okay, and here's our final one. Who's got group 4?
That was me, Abby, and Leah.
Well, go for it.
So we tried to name him. We called him Golden Frederick for a long time.
Golden
and then Abby,
Frederick?
Yeah, and then Abby actually looked him up, like found the statue and everything, and his name was Johann from Vienna.
Is that right?
Yep.
How resourceful is that?
So Johann has been complaining of neck pain. He performs 3 shows, one in the morning, one at noon, and then one in the afternoon. He is slightly deaf, so he has to watch the composer for all of his cues. That's why his neck is arched like that. And so we need to do some lengthening on the left side of his neck into the left trapezius. And then we also need to do some lengthening on that left side of his waist into his abdomen because of the way he's standing like that, which also may cause pain in his hips as well. And we also believe he might have carpal tunnel in both of his hands because of how pinched they are. One hand holding the bow and the other focused on the strings.
Yeah, one is in flexion and the other one is an extension. Both are going to put strain on the carpal tunnel. Very good.
And then he also might have some right-sided pain in the mandible on that right side of his jaw. And that's what we saw.
How did you find that, Abby? How did you find out who that was?
I Googled gold violin statue.
Really?
You can also use a Google image search. So you can drag that to the picture to the Google search bar, and it will find it as well.
Yeah, that's the real detective work.
That's very fun. That is very fun. Musicians, whether they're professionals or amateurs, a lot of what they have to do is hold a posture for a long time, and then they've got relatively fine movements. So small motor control, and they're trying to counterbalance a lot of times the instrument. Luke's dad is a avid bird watcher, and I remember when he and I were married, he was teaching me how to bird watch and using the binoculars and looking up. And I just went through, my arms ached and my shoulders ached and the back of my head ached. And, so you have to learn, there's an adaptation that comes along with that. And so people who have a demand to be twisted a little bit like this. Luke, are you on the call? Luke Allen Fritz, are you still there?
Yes.
Whoops. You had said that you had some problems in your elbow and your shoulder, and you thought it might be from the guitar. Do you remember that?
It could be guitar. The elbow problem actually started with having to do passing drills with the basketball. So that was a repetitive strain injury that then was exacerbated by refusing to stop wanting to do what I wanted to do. So this is a common story that you'll hear, right? Maybe there's an initial injury or something, and then a person doesn't take a break and still puts themselves into a position and posture that strains that structure in even in a different way. So, but it's an asymmetrical position. You can look at this, the violin in particular. I actually had I can't say she was pro, but a very avid violinist as a client back in the day. And so managing this postural distortion in relation to the shoulders and neck in particular was the key challenge. But then as we worked our way out from that, there's just a whole different dynamic of looking at not only how does that maybe disrupt the positioning of their body. Are they a musician that tends to, in this case, are they a soloist where they're maybe standing? They're in an orchestra, they're going to be stuck sitting predominantly. Same principle with guitar players. Are they sitting for the most part? Which leg are they putting the guitar on? Are they standing? Is it a heavy guitar? Is it a light one? Electric guitars are heavier by normally compared to others. I played saxophone. You can get different braces for that, a harness that goes around the neck. So I ended up getting one that acted like a bracket on either one of my shoulders so I could clip it to my chest and it was easier. So there's just a lot of interesting ways to look at how does the person perform the function and then what does that do to the rest of the body. And so there can be a systemic idea of posture, but even then looking at individually, if you look at this position, you know, the rotation of the shoulders, the one shoulder, the left hand is in external rotation, the right shoulder is in internal rotation. And the nature of how they're holding the bow versus the dexterity that has to happen with the fingers of the left hand. That's different. So it can be a very interesting problem solving dynamic. And it's one of these things where it's looking big and then looking how does an action affect the whole body as a unit, thinking in terms of posture. How does it affect maybe paired structures near it? So if I change the shape of the elbow joint, what does that do to the shoulder and the wrist joint, you know? And then even looking regionally, if one side of the elbow is tending to be stuck in a flexed and shortened position, what does that do to the muscles that hold it in that position, shortened, and then what happens to the muscles on the opposite side? And then during the session, during the massage, it's just trying to keep all of that in mind all at the same time. That can feel very overwhelming. And that's where she and I tell you so much that the best initial assessment we even have, we want to look at a person's posture and movement and have them do these motions for us. But doing a good general massage, that first 1 or 2 sessions of just working through the whole body and trying really hard to think, how does all of this relate together? How can I work on a person's legs and be thinking about their neck and shoulders and their arms? And trying to just really critically think and be mindful of the outcome and the goal. You know, am I helping this person move better? Am I helping decrease their pain? Am I trying to increase range of motion? It's just, it's fascinating. And it turns into a really interesting kind of, there's all kinds of analogies. Every body is a mystery, every body is a puzzle. And the rule of thumb becomes you go consistently back to the general full body with no mindless rubbing. Always thinking about what you're doing and what the goal is.
And what's not wrong, but what's right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed at how we're able to adapt to certain um, job performance demands or an injury, and find ourselves able to find a way to function and find a new normal on that. I'm always amazed when I do assessment. I go through and I go, okay, wow, isn't that amazing that this did this and that. That's good. That's functioning really good. And looking for what's amazing and right about all of this. When you guys were doing these and looking at these pictures, did any of you find yourselves assuming the positions a little bit yourselves to try to get an idea of, what's short, what's long, what joints are in a multiple movement? Because this one right here, this is an internal rotation, but it's also got a little bit of adduction and it's got some flexion that goes with it too, so there's multiple planes going on, multiple activities. What's stability oriented? This is about stability, to hold that still, whereas this is all about mobility.
Well, even when I saw this picture, my first thought was most violin players actually have their chins tucked onto the violin for stability, which is even more exaggerated than what this guy looks like.
And when I looked for these pictures, I looked for things that you could find. Okay, this one was probably the hardest. Group 1 probably had the hardest one, where there's not an exaggerated posture here. But when I look through all this, I go, but our rapper here, my goodness, look at what he's been through, and still can get up and walk around, do what he wants to do, and appreciate being outside in the sunshine and all that. And this this woman here, she raised 12 kids. That's really cool, and still has a happy look on her face, and just starting their life here. And what they do today, and if they continue to do that for 20 years, what sort of effect will that be? And could massage intervene so that detrimental effects don't happen? Luke has said to you, I'm sure, it's hard to measure what didn't happen because of the ongoing cleanup. So it's not always about reversing. It's about keeping things so that there is that adaptive capacity in through there, so that they can go and jump and carry kids around and mow the lawn and drive for 6 hours or whatever, and then come back to a fairly reset, a pretty good reset, so that they can start that all over again without cumulative problems.
And that's where, in the context of assessment and developing a treatment plan, it's also important to get a clear sense of what our goals are. And then in response to that, figuring out, are they realistic? Is the client's expectations, are they realistic? And if a person has had, let's say, a bad injury, or let's say a joint replacement, and their expectation is that everything's going to return to how it was when they felt the best they ever did, that is unrealistic. And a practitioner that reinforces that too strongly is being very unethical, of saying, if we follow this treatment plan, it's going to be perfect, and I guarantee your knee will move exactly the way that it used to. So figuring out these qualitative as well as quantitative outcomes for people, restructuring the conversation to, well, that it would be great if we can get you to feel as best as possible. But the key important thing is, what does this limit you from accomplishing? What is the goal for what you want to be able to do day to day? As well as being able to chart and figure out what is the exact range of motion I'm looking for. I may say it would be optimal if I could get them to be able to have at least 90 to 100 degrees of knee flexion. That's the optimal quantitative outcome that I'm working towards. But the qualitative dynamic is that they're able to get in and out of a car comfortably and be able to drive, you know? So sometimes restructuring these ideas and knowing our certain limitations. And one of the dynamics I've had even with, the athletes, for example, is getting it back to, it's okay for you to feel stiff, a little uncomfortable after playing a game. I mean, that's a lot of activity. The question is, can you go out there and play and do it comfortably and achieve what you need to? If you can do those movements and actions effectively, that's great. And if we can just manage that and keep you at status quo, then that's a victory, you know? So sometimes even helping people as they come in, getting a clearer sense of not just what the quantitative number is, but the qualitative outcome, giving them a sense of what they want to be able to do. Is it can be being able to, as simple as what I was saying, being able to get in and out of a car, put their coat on, you know, these little things that we take for granted. When you take that away, it's very frustrating for somebody. So it's yeah, that's my words.
And he's sticking to it too. So here's our lunch work. I did put some YouTube clips up on Canvas. I think some of you have already looked at them. They are more medically oriented. There's nurses, and I can't remember if the one is a physical therapist or if it is an osteopath. So what I want to discuss with that is, given that a very important part of the history assessment, as well as the postural assessment and the movement assessment, is to identify if there is a need for referral. And then we move towards, is there an area that I have to be more cautious about? And then we move to, is this an area where I could work towards some intervention and there's a good potential for adaptation toward the goals that the person wants? Given that there is that sequence and what's going on with stuff, as you look through these videos, I want you to pull out what is most applicable to massage. Now, it's important that we know what other professionals do as well, and we get an idea of what that is, and that we've got a level of crosstalk back and forth. So you're hearing a language when you listen to these other occupations and how they are doing this. But there are areas that in those videos that we can use more and fit more into the massage world. And then when we get back, these are just those videos, we're gonna talk about what those are, you know, and the information we glean from those. And then we're gonna get into this idea of, once I make a decision that intervening is got the ability for the person to adapt towards the goals they're after, how would I go about starting to do that? And you've had inhibitory pressure, it's called ischemic pressure, it's called different things, static hold. And then the one I want to really focus on a little bit here is the muscle energy techniques, because they can specifically target what's short and what's long if you do it correctly. So we'll be back. You have to have your afternoon Zoom for this, but we'll be back, and this is what we're going to work towards this afternoon at 2:30. Sound good? Sounds good. All right, everybody. See you in a couple hours. Sooner or later, I can end this thing.